Each badger marks the track with its own scent.
His black legs are short but very powerful for digging. The name badger probably comes from the French word bêcher, meaning digger.
And hello, everybody. Welcome along another edition of the Cricket Badger podcast, 607, I think it is now, joined by Dean Wilson. Hello, Dean. How are you?
Yeah, good evening, James. Not too bad. Or is it the Badger?
Before we get into the chat, thank you very much to the two sponsors of the Cricket Badger podcast at the moment, seatfrog.com and also sponsored by Match Bingo as well. We'll talk a bit about them later, play their adverts as we go through. But it's a kind of bittersweet chat, this, because I never met Dave Lawrence, but I watched him a lot, and I had the impression that he was a larger-than-life, big, happy, gregarious fella who basically obviously suffered from motor neuron disease later in life and obviously passed away recently. But reading the start of your book, Dean, you knew him for a while.
Yeah, that's right. We had a relationship, I guess, that goes back about just over 10 years now. And even though I knew who he was, I'd watched him playing growing up a little bit before my time. But I do remember, obviously, that the injury, when that happened, I was a mad, keen cricket fan. And so I do remember that very vividly. But no, back in 2014, when we actually kind of got to know each other, we bumped into each other at a match, and there was a kind of...
Oh, you've broken up on me and free.
Yeah, we...
Oh, you're back.
Oh, sorry.
Back. That's okay. You're back.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a little bit of recognition just as we bumped into each other and just got chatting, and I was very much taken with his size, his muscles. He was kind of, in his bodybuilding phase, or rather just finished, I think, the competitive bodybuilding. And I was just so taken with it, and asked him, how on earth he got to that size. And he told me about the success he'd been having in bodybuilding. And I thought, goodness me, this is absolutely fascinating. I had no idea. And I thought to myself, if this is news to me, I'm sure it's going to be news to a few other people. So I asked if we could do a story about it. He was happy to, and then we spent a really fun afternoon in London where he kind of told me all about his second life, as it were, on the stage, or his second sporting life, I should say. And then our relationship, grew from there. But I think the word you use, gregarious, is absolutely spot on, because from that afternoon in London, he was just full of life and such a warm character. I really enjoyed spending time with him, right up until the end.
It was quite I went away on holiday, and your publishers very kindly sent me a copy of the book, and the first thing I picked up when I walked back in was your book, and it was the same day that it was announced that he died. So it was kind of, I opened this parcel having heard the news, and it was kind of his face on the front cover. It was kind of a bit of a surreal moment, really, that I opened that book on that day. But when he did the bodybuilding, he got proper big, didn't he? He really took that seriously.
Yeah, he did. He'd always trained a lot. He'd always had a very impressive physique. He was a powerfully built fast bowler. He wasn't like a James Anderson or a Glenn McGrath, even, sort of stick thin and, very light on their way to the crease. He was a powerfully built man, charging in, and he worked out in the gym even as a player. He knew, or he thought that for the job that he was doing, that he needed to be strong, physically strong. And I think he was a little bit ahead of his time, actually, when it comes to sort of strength and conditioning that we see a lot of bowlers doing now. The gym is a friend of the fast bowler these days. And so, after he'd finished playing and obviously had that knee injury, he spent a lot of time in the gym. He loved it. He loved working out. He loved looking good. He had little bit of an ego to him, as you can imagine. And he had some friends in the gym that he used to work out in who thought that he might be able to, make it as a bodybuilder, or be competitive, I should say, as a bodybuilder. He didn't really fancy it to begin with, but over time he continued working out and then went to go and support a friend of his at a bodybuilding event. And when he got there, he had a look around and thought to himself, well, hang on a minute, I'm in better shape than some of these guys who are supposed to be up there. I reckon I could probably do a good job. So that was what sparked the desire to really give it a good go. But once he did that, like any kind of athlete who understands discipline and what it takes to get to the top, that's what he did. And yeah, he worked really hard for pumping the weights, but also with the diet, making sure that all those nasty carbs that I love so much didn't pass his lips. And he was a seriously impressive and understandably successful bodybuilder.
I mean, you've interviewed a lot of cricketers like myself, and if you, the one thing that most of them have in common is that competitiveness. They are driven to try and succeed, and you don't lose that really. Once they've retired, they try and find something to substitute. And obviously, you found the gym and the bodybuilding.
Yeah, definitely. It's so true. I think quite a lot of cricketers seem to find it on the golf course. That competitiveness or paddle seems to be a new one that everyone's keen to take up.
Most of them whilst they're still playing as well, Dean, on the golf course. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that competitiveness certainly comes through. But yeah, look, I think you're right. I think whatever these kind of athletes turn their hands to, they kind of want to be the best. They want to prove themselves and get that constant sort of validation. I suppose there's it takes all sorts, and there are different characters and different character traits to everyone. Of course there are, and I guess it also depends on how good you were at cricket and how hard you had to work to get yourselves up to that certain level. But I do think it's those qualities that I touched on before about discipline and about a bit of ego, that desire to prove yourself. I think never leaves you. And certainly I think with Dave, whether it was his bodybuilding or even running his business, he took part in a few things, like not Tough Mudders. He took part in an event called the Superhuman Games, which he did with his son Buster. And that again, it's just all very competitive, wanting to beat everyone around them. So he took it all seriously enough, I should say.
I don't want to speak to you, Dean, but I don't think I'm going to be entering that. As a player, I can remember watching him, and he was kind of obviously a big man, but a big, powerfully built fast bowler, who I think was a bit underestimated. He obviously played 5 tests for England. He was kind of just making his way in the team once he got that horrific injury. But I think as a player, maybe forgotten a little bit as to how good he was.
Yeah, I think that was part of the itch that he wanted to scratch with the bodybuilding, because I think he felt that there was some unfinished business when it came to his international career. He said to me right from the outset, actually, all those years ago when we met, that in his mind he always had 25 tests as a kind of benchmark level, where you could kind of really compare yourself. He said after 25 tests, well, if you played 25 tests, you had to be good enough to get that many games. So that kind of proved a certain level of quality. But then also it would give you a big enough sample size to actually show how good you were in comparison, to everybody else. And I think that was something that he really wanted and really strived for. And in the end, obviously fell well short of that. The injury was, denied him clearly at a time when he probably would have had a fairly decent run in the side. Although in the 90s, a decent run might have meant 2 games. But he, there were a couple of incidents, beforehand. He actually made his debut in '88. In fact, he was first of all talked about as a potential England player in '85. He had a terrific season in '85. Gloucestershire finished second in the championship. Courtney Walsh, Syd, and Kevin Curran as a pace trio at Gloucestershire just kind of blew teams away. All took absolute stackfuls of wickets, and he was being talked about then as a potential England bowler. He said that there was still some conversations about who would sort of be the next Bob Willis. Bob Willis had retired not long before, and so that's when his name sort of first was connected with England. Didn't happen. He went on a England A tour, or it might have been called England B in those days, but it's certainly what would be a Lions tour now, and had to wait for his chance for the full England side. He played a one-off test against Sri Lanka in '88. And what should have happened in that winter, he was selected to go on tour with England to India. And unfortunately for him, the tour to India was cancelled due to players who were on the international blacklist for having toured South Africa, either as a rebel tourist or had played domestic cricket in South Africa during that period. And so there's a bit of a diplomatic row. That tour never took place. They tried to hastily rearrange a tour to New Zealand, but again, the sort of political machinations that, stirred, and that didn't take place either. So there was no Test cricket at all during that winter, which he would have played in. And he says in the book, he said to me, he felt very much robbed of Test matches and the ability to show what he could do. It took a little bit of time then for him to get his chance again with England in '91.
We all want a bit of that first class lifestyle, right?
Well, with Seafrog, to travel first class on trains for a lot less.
We're talking up to 60% off first class tickets using our upgrade options.
Think eBay, but for train tickets.
When you upgrade, and you can enjoy food, drink, and a whole lot of legroom. We've got the alcohol.
It's beyond simple to sign up and start bidding. Just download Seafrog and upgrade your ticket today.
Good news, Dean's back and he's moving, and you can also get good news by using the code CricketFrog on seatfrog.com. Book your train tickets. If you're going to the cricket, going anywhere, you can use Seatfrog to book your tickets. You can also get cheap upgrades to first class as well. And if you use the Cricket Frog code, you can get £5 off. So I mean, why not? Do it now. Anyway, well, don't do it now. Stay and watch us for a bit, and then do it after this. But in Syd's voice, the extraordinary life of Dave Lawrence, and joined by Dean Wilson to talk about it. The author, would you call you co-author? You're on the front cover.
Yeah, I mean, ghostwriter probably would be the term I'm most comfortable with. I've done that for a few players over the years, but to be fair to Syd, he very much felt it was a collaboration between us, and I'm very happy to take the second billing under him.
When you agreed with him to do the book, had he had his diagnosis by then?
No, not at all. We actually talked about doing the book when he was fit and healthy. No problems. He'd been thinking about it for a while, and sort of said to me, he said that, I think I've had quite an interesting life. There's quite a few sort of stories to tell, and beyond just even the cricket, the injury, the bodybuilding, and running a nightclub for 20 plus years. And so I was kind of captivated, really. I wanted to know a bit more. I was immediately happy to kind of get involved. I thought that, as the first British born black cricketer to play for England, he was, an absolute pioneer and a bit of a trailblazer. So I thought that it would be an important story to tell, one that I'd certainly be interested in, and I was sort of privileged and honoured that he asked me. So that was before, well before his diagnosis, a couple of years beforehand. And we just, we were taking our time because we thought we had, all the time in the world. So we were just kind of, we'd got to the stage where I had a chapter outlines. I had written a sample chapter. I'd written a synopsis, all the things that you kind of need to get publishers interested. And we were actually just kind of at that point of sending it out to publishers. And then before the diagnosis, the diagnosis isn't just a kind of, one day everything's fine and then the next day you've got MND. It was, symptoms started, popped up little by little. And so he had gone in for a knee replacement of the same knee that he'd injured in New Zealand. And what caused or what prompted the tests and the road towards MND was the fact that he hadn't recovered. He wasn't recovering from that operation, which is a straightforward knee op. Thousands upon thousands are done, every year, and huge success rate. And he just wasn't recovering from it, and that was the sort of the start of this journey. And so we kind of we put things on a pause as far as the book went, because we were both sort of curious to sort of see what would end up happening. And then actually, I spoke to him. So it was kind of January, February, that sort of time in 2024. He was in hospital, or he just gone into hospital to start having various tests. And essentially neither his left nor his right leg were working, and they thought it was either a kind of virus maybe that had been brought on by the surgery, maybe something brought on by stress. There were lots of different tests that he was going through, but he got to a point where it was just his lower half that was struggling. His fingers, his hands, his head, everything from the waist up was fine. And he kind of told me about his frustrations and how annoying, but he sort of said, well, if I'm going to have to if I'm in a wheelchair or I need to help walking, for the rest of my life, then, so be it. But at least I can kind of live with that. And it was a few months later, having gone through a whole range of tests and more tests and essentially eliminating all other possible options. Then in June 24, he got the news that it was MND. And MND, when I think back to it now, that's what he had, and it kind of everything fits. But we never mentioned that. That was never, and that just wasn't a topic of conversation. And so when he told me, it did come as a surprise and a hammer blow, but obviously not as much as it was for him. He describes getting the diagnosis. That's the first chapter in the book, getting the diagnosis, and it's deliberately kind of slaps you around the face because that's what happened to him. It was the most devastating news anyone can receive, and the circumstances around it as well were pretty tough. So, yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's been in the news, isn't it? In the sporting news with Rob Burrow, Doddy Weir, and the Scottish rugby player as well. There's been a number of people with MND, and it's just such a cruel thing to have, isn't it? To kind of just rob you of your body, basically, and then it doesn't. You just described the timeline there. Not long from the diagnosis to his death, was it?
No, not at all. Just a year, really. And there are different, and this is part of the money that's being raised for MND research, and there are different, I guess, kind of types of MND, or, so some MND patients, it's very aggressive, and it takes them very, very quickly. Others, it can be years, can be quite a long period of time. The average is 3 years from diagnosis. So obviously within that, you've got some really long periods of time, and in Sid's case, I think a year is really, really quite short. He knew. I mean, that was the thing. You mentioned Rob Burrow, Doddy, where he knew exactly what this diagnosis meant because of Rob Burrow, and he mentioned him, a few times to me, because he knew how things ended up for him, and the kind of the shell that he became over time. We saw those images, obviously, of Kevin Sinfield carrying him over, the finish line, at one of his marathons, and that story was told very compassionately and very thoroughly by BBC and others. And so Syd was very much aware of what was ahead for him, what was coming. The interesting thing about it was that in those early days after the diagnosis, and I spoke to him, and he was absolutely devastated, as I said. And some of his thoughts, or the way that he thought about the future was quite negative and despairing, which is totally understandable reaction. But then over time, just the character, his character that kind of came through, the defiance, the sort of the champion mentality, where actually he was then kind of, rather than be sort of defeatist and look at how he might end up, he was then determined to make the absolute most of the time that he had, and actually then try and use his position, his platform, to do what he could for others, to raise money for MNDA, Motor Neurone Disease Association, the Cricketers Trust, PCA Cricketers Trust, which two charities that really supported him, and I should say that money from every copy of the book sold will be going to those charities. That was the kind of character of the person to sort of, even in his darkest hour, still think about others and think about what he could do positively to support other people and to make the most of the time he had left. And he certainly did that. And I just thought it was, we went on a bit of he went on the journey. I went on a little bit of a journey with him, and kind of taught me a lot. It was a very emotional and meaningful bit of work, for me to do. But it was more than work, really. It was learning a bit about the human condition, really. I certainly learned a fair bit from Syd over those 12 months, for sure.
Well, I was going to ask you earlier, was there any additional pressure on you to write a good book, because obviously the circumstances that were towards the end of that writing process?
I mean, I think, I think there's always pressure whenever you write anything. You want it to be as good as possible. Every piece that I've actually, no, that's not true. You try to do a good piece of work, wherever you can, of course, and especially with other people's words. I mentioned that I've been a ghostwriter throughout my career. I was a ghostwriter to Lord Botham for 10 years. I was a ghostwriter to Ben Stokes for 3 years. I've been a ghostwriter to other players, Stuart Broad, James Anderson, Tim Bresnan, all the greats. And so when you're when you are putting other people's words into the page, obviously you're trying to make it as readable as possible, as kind of entertaining as possible, but also by being really true to them and making sure that it is that they're, it's them coming through, it's their voice, as we titled this book. And so, with Syd, the pressure was on. There were a couple of bits of pressure. One was time pressure, because, clearly knew that we weren't going to have as much time as we thought. So, we had to get on with it. And so there was that pressure, but also at the same time to do it as well as I could. So it wasn't rushed. It was kind of, was it more haste, less speed, or the other way around? We just tried to, I did it as well as I could. And I also, not only did I speak to Syd at length, but I also spoke to other people around him, other friends, his wife Gaynor, his son Buster, and then, people like Jack Russell, Phil Tufnell, Derek Pringle, Andy Brassington, Paul Remains, all sorts of people involved in his cricketing life. Some people involved in his sort of nightclub days and bars and restaurants that he ran as well. And then the owner of the gym that he trained at, Matt Hudd. Matt Hudd was a really interesting conversation because, he told me that essentially the gym that Syd trained at was it's a very spit and sawdust type gym. People go there to work hard and doesn't have any kind of airs or graces, but it's got a real heart and a real soul. It's a real community. And Matt said that was down to Syd. Syd was the beating heart of this gym, which I thought was, really instructive again as to the character and the personality of Syd, that he was someone around whom others could coalesce, that he was a kind of inspirational figure that people wanted to gather around. So I feel as though I did everything I could to make the book as good as it could be, but obviously as quickly as possible as well.
Was there an element with Syd that he wanted to leave? I mean, obviously you mentioned the charities and helping other people and those admirable parts of his last months, but was there an element with kind of finishing the book off of leaving his story behind and kind of leaving that book there as a solid thing that was going to be his legacy to kind of a small degree?
Yeah, definitely. As I say, that wasn't the aim from the outset, but I think it quickly became that. After the diagnosis and obviously once we got into talking about his life, and I think it was quite cathartic for him at times, thinking back and remembering various stories and episodes and things that he lived through, and of course jogging his memory, to think back to those days. And I think that when you're, it's quite a unique, sorry, not a unique, but it's quite an interesting thing when you are facing your own mortality. You do start to think about, how will I be remembered? What will my legacy be? And so I think doing the book really chimed into those thoughts. Yeah. And I think he really wanted to have as you say, a kind of solid, lasting legacy that any of his, he's got one grandchild, another on the way. And then anybody else in his family that kind of comes thereafter, will know exactly who he was, how he felt about things, what he did, thanks to this book. And so, there was a kind of responsibility with that. I was very much aware of the circumstances we now found ourselves in, and the importance of the book, and what it would mean for him, but also for his family. And that's not something I sort of took lightly. I sort of lent into it. I felt, as I say, quite privileged to do it in the first place, but it took on, kind of heavier meaning as we went through it. But I wasn't afraid of that or worried about that. I was very happy to tell his story the way that he wanted to as well.
In a way, it's quite an honor, isn't it, to kind of be given that responsibility?
Yeah, It is, and I do, I do think about it from time to time about that. I guess that responsibility, because as well, I've spoken to lots of people having done the book, having published it. There was a fantastic afternoon where we launched it at the Lashings 11 against the Dave Lawrence 11 in Bristol. A fantastic afternoon. The last time he was out in public, and just the warmth of love and appreciation for him at the ground was something pretty special. And then I had lots of people come up to me and sort of, I don't know, thank me and or congratulate me on having done it and got it out while he was still around. And so I do get I have had a sense of the respect that people have for him. And so, definitely an honor and a privilege to have done it. And as I say, just delighted to have published it while he was still there. The big, I'll tell you very quickly, the big day, wasn't even the day that it was published. It was the day, having written it, having finished the first draft, having, had the manuscript on my laptop. And I drove down to Bristol to his house and then sat with him, and his wife and his son in what was their living room, but which had turned into his bedroom, and read the book to him. And that was an incredibly emotional day, sort of 6 hours or so. And there were a lot of tears from everyone, but, that was where I sort of breathe a little easier, because I was like, well, he knows I've done it. He knows that I've written it. He's heard it. He kind of was mainly nodding along. There were a couple of bits where he didn't like the phrasing or the part of the story wasn't quite right. I'd got the wrong end of the stick on something. And so he, corrected me. And so he, as I say, it is his words. He has had, kind of final, say on it all. And so there, I had a few notes to go back with and tidy up and edit. But that was a big day for me, just because I think if I in the end, if it hadn't published before, if he hadn't seen the book out, but I'd managed to read it to him, I would still have felt at peace and kind of, I've done it, and he knows that it's done. But then to be able to bring it out and have a couple of weeks, he stamped his signature on a few copies, very rare copies. So yeah, the couple of weeks that we had with it was very special.
I was thinking what you've been talking about. Obviously, you can't battle motor neuron disease, can you? That's going to take you at some stage. But as a player, he had the most horrific knee injury. People talk about the sound of it kind of almost reverberating around the cricket ground, because his knee just kind of cracked, didn't it? And that absolutely, it ended his career. He tried to get back, but it ended his career. But as a player, you get injuries, and you can try and fight them and rehab and do all the rest of it. Motor neuron disease, you can't do anything about it, can you? He's going to beat you at some stage. It's a different challenge altogether, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And I think that's the battle, if you want to call it that, isn't with the disease. It's with coming to terms with the disease. That's the battle. And I could see it in him. As I said to begin with, it was so devastating. He couldn't really talk on the phone because, he was in tears. The first two or three conversations, the first 2 or 3 times we spoke on the phone after the diagnosis, we couldn't have a conversation because he was in tears. And then bit by bit, the realization of what's coming and as I say, trying to come to terms with it, that is the fight really. And that is the battle. And it was a battle in the end that he won, because he did face it. He faced it really bravely. with real purpose. Knowing full well what was coming. And that those are the things that I will take. I said that I learned a lot through that experience, and I think that was probably the most important thing, was just the way in which he faced up to it. Was so impressive. And
one of the loveliest things I saw, Dean, was the T20 Plus final, and James Bracey taking the trophy. I mean, James has been on this podcast; he's a nice lad. But what he did that day was lovely, wasn't it? And giving it to Syd in his wheelchair, and there was genuine emotion there, wasn't there? He was the proud Gloucestershire player, and that meant something to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that moment will, I've called it iconic, really. That image of James with Syd, and it was really touching moment. But both of them had tears in their eyes, both of kind of joy, because Syd was so proud of the players. He really enjoyed that day. He got there, and it was a bit of it was a bit emotional, because he actually went out onto the outfield between the first and second games, as part of the sort of PCA's fundraising on the day, and that would have been the first time. He knew that would have been the first time that a lot of people would have seen him in the wheelchair, and I think a few people would have been shocked to see his condition. And he was, as I mentioned right early on, he had a bit of an ego, and so he was a little bit, he worried about that. But he went out, did it, and then enjoyed, the next game and the final from one of the boxes. And he was full of pride. He put it all. He'd been a player, he'd been out there representing Gloucestershire. Knows what it meant. That's his club, Gloucester man, born and bred. And so to see the team do so well, win that trophy, also to do it under, Mark Elaine as the head coach, really great friend of Syd's, teammates together, and then they've kind of supported each other, through Mark's coaching career. So to see Mark bring a trophy back as head coach, and for James Bracey to bring it up to Syd, and it was a very natural and kind of organic thing. It wasn't planned. He had no idea. It was just a very classy, natural act from James, really authentic, I think, which reflects, fantastically on him and on the club, and the sort of the community feel around the club as well. So I think that image will be iconic and will be shown, for many, many years to come, just what it means, what sporting clubs and communities mean to each other, to have that kind of success. So it was a great moment.
I watched pretty much all of that finals day. I can't remember too much of the cricket, but I'll always remember that moment. As you say, iconic moment that, and lovely moment as well. I should say thank you very much to Match Bingo for their support of the Cricket Badger podcast. If you download their app, you can play along. They've got some cricket games on there now. You basically get lines instead of numbers. You get events that might happen in a cricket match. You get a line, or a full house, and you can win some money. Gamble responsibly, and quote cricket 200, and you will get whatever deposit you put in. It will be trebled, basically 200% added to your initial deposit. So Match Bingo, thank you very much for your support of the Cricket Badger podcast. We are talking about Syd Lawrence and his remarkable, extraordinary life, and Dean with me to talk about ghostwriting the book with Syd. I put out that we're going to be having the chat, and a couple of questions came in from the Twitter followers and what have you. And Aklak says, prior to his diagnosis, did Syd feel forgotten by the game and the ECB?
At times, yes. Yeah. He sort of fell away a little bit, fell out of love with the game a little bit. After, he was self-aware enough to know that the way things finished with the injury, the way things initially finished, well, they finished twice with Gloucestershire. They finished initially after he had the injury and then tried to come back. He actually did the injury again a year later, so he split his kneecap twice. And then when he came back in 1994, he was told by John Bracewell, who was the coach, that they were going to move on. Didn't really think that there was a place for him in the squad, but he didn't want to. He didn't want to be told that. He was pretty stubborn and wanted to do things his way. So he tried to kind of fight for a spot, but he wasn't the bowler that he was before the injury, and so actually things ended slightly acrimoniously at Gloucestershire initially, not kind of on his own terms, and then he obviously went away. He'd started his first bar called Boom Bar in 1996, just after Euro 96. And then he played some charity games for John Paul Getty's 11. And there's a really good story about his relationship with John Paul Getty, which I'll encourage people to read. And then he sort of thought, well, maybe there's a little bit more left in the tank, and he did in the end come back and play a handful. I think he played 3 more first class games in 1997. It's quite interesting because I tell the story in the book. He played against Surrey and he bounced Mark Butcher out twice. Had him caught hooking down at long leg, and Butch was at Headingley when Syd passed away, commentating on the England-India Test match, and actually told the story on air about when Syd came back and had him caught hooking, which is lovely. And so sorry, I've lost my train of thought here where I was going with this, but
yeah, a bit removed from the game. I imagine that as well.
Sorry, that was falling out of love. Yeah, so yeah. Having left the game in 97 properly. He did say that he trained as a professional trainer, as a personal trainer, and he was qualified as a kind of what you might call a strength and conditioning coach.
Yeah.
And he did try to find work in the professional game using those skills. Rode to every county and got nowhere. And I think that was the sort of thing that kind of had him feeling a bit, forgotten, unloved, however you want to put it. And so, in answer to the question, there was a little bit of that, but in the end, being made president of Gloucestershire, in the last 3 years, really kind of brought him back into the game. And I think he was very much kind of part of it again, by the time he passed away.
Which is right, isn't it? It's good that happened. Simon, who's a regular tweeter to me on the old X now, as it's called. What was Syd's best ever game and why? And he also says it's a follow-up question. I'll tell you what. I'll let you answer that first. Best ever game and why?
I think that he will say the best ever game was the Test match at the Oval against the West Indies, the last game of that series. He took 5 for 106 in the second innings, and he took the wicket of Sir Viv Richards, the last ever bowler to take his wicket in Test cricket, which had a huge amount of poignancy to him as well. But that was his one and only 5-wicket haul for England, in a Test match, and I think kind of provided a sort of confirmation that he belonged there, and his career could have taken off from that point. There were some other county games. He took 7. I think his best wicket haul was 7 for I think it's 7 for 47 off the top of my head. I'm just trying to think back. Yeah, some of the games that he played, he always said that he tried to raise his game. Well, not tried to raise his game. He often raised his game when he played against Somerset, played against Viv, because, you know, he was his hero and, you know, a bit of a mentor to him. And, you know, he was like a big brother, really. He just wanted to show.
He was my hero as well, Dean, but I never got him out.
And he did have some success against him. He had some difficult times against Yorkshire, mainly.
Hold that thought, because the next question is coming on to that. And you were right, by the way. The 7 for 47, bang on. You are Syd Lawrence is your specialist subject on Mastermind. You've got at least 1 point there. Simon continued with, and sadly, it's impossible not to mention the racism he received. Have we learnt anything or made that much progress? Would be very interested in yours and Dean's thoughts. I read the bit on the chapter on racism, and there was a little follow-up bit later on in the book where he mentions it again, and it didn't surprise me where he experienced it. I'll leave it there and kind of dot and let you carry on.
Yeah. It was the main. Well, there are several episodes throughout his career, throughout his life, really, unsurprisingly. The first one he has talked about before, about a teammate leaving a banana outside his door, knocking on the door and leaving a banana there for him to find on his first away game for Gloucestershire Seconds. But the most kind of impactful, I think, or the day that he says was the worst day that he ever had on a cricket field was at Scarborough in 84, I think it was, where he and John Shepherd were just given dogs abuse by the fans, who could, you know, felt fairly emboldened to say whatever they wanted to. He kind of put it down to the fact that Jeff Boycott, you know, they'd come to see Boyks put on a show, and he'd got run out fairly early on in the innings, they got more and more inebriated and more annoyed, and essentially took their frustration out on him and John Shepherd. And, you know, he just said sort of 3.5 hours in the field, being called every sort of name under the sun, and you know, the worst kind of names. And you know, he said that it was so bad, you know, David Graveney, the captain, tried to protect him and bring him into the, you know, didn't leave him out on the boundary, brought him into the field, into the ring. But of course, you know, the ball gets hit past you, you've got to chase it out to the boundary. You know, they're still going to get you. So yeah, that was a tough day. And
it reminded me, I just watched the Serena Williams documentary on, I don't know which platform it's on, but she played a tennis tournament at Indian Wells when she was only young. She was a teenager, and she got absolutely, it was like almost 99% of the entire stadium was basically giving her racist abuse and booing her. And there was one person in the crowd who basically said, "Come on, Serena, you better, you can do this." And she tuned into that voice, and she won that match. But she didn't go back to Indian Wells as a tournament for years after that. And Syd didn't go back to Scarborough for about, was it 7 or 8 years after that incident?
yeah,
But he didn't have such a happy return, because when she went back, it was kind of like everybody was really nice to her, but he wasn't quite the same for Syd, was it?
He wasn't quite the same. No, he went back there in 91, and actually, you know, got abused again. Not quite as vociferously or to quite the same extent, but enough that it, enough for everyone to notice. And actually, I mean, he talks about the first occasion, because they were playing, you know, when they played the game at Scarborough, it was a Sunday league game. It was a one-day game in between the championship match or just before the championship match. And so after it happened, I want to say Johnny Bairstow, but it's not Johnny. David Bairstow, Johnny's dad, went into the changing room to see Syd and effectively apologise for the abuse that he'd got, and, you know, how, you know, they were sort of ashamed of the fans, and, you know, didn't want him to, well, just went to apologise and to express their sympathy and their empathy. In 91, the Yorkshire players went one step further. Darren Gough, who was playing in that game, actually stepped in and essentially, dealt with the fan before Syd got hold of him. I think as well, Wayne Morton, the physio, was there, and he climbed into the stands to try and pick out the perpetrators. So I think it's one of those things. The question was, would it still happen today? And I think that there probably are those who would try and find a moment, if they could, to abuse players, for whether it's racism or anything else. I think though that it's so unacceptable that actually I'd like to think that people around them just kind of wouldn't stand for it, that person would be ejected pretty quickly. There was something sort of similar that happened in New Zealand. I remember when Jofra Archer was on the receiving end of some comments from the crowd, and that was dealt with pretty quickly. I do think that by and large, the audience, I'd like to think, maybe I'm naive, but I'd like to think that the audience now would kind of call it out and wouldn't stand for it. I certainly wouldn't expect any player to kind of put up with it, and I think that there'd be some pretty swift action. But the fact that it hasn't happened, the fact that players haven't had to walk off in cricket in the same way that they have done in football or other sports is maybe a good thing. I think cricket is really trying to grapple with and face up to the unacceptable nature of racism, and all you can do is just kind of keep rooting it out and keep fighting it, wherever you can. It's never going to disappear. It's never going to be, completely eradicated, but we can just keep fighting, fight the good fight, as it were.
I think you're probably right about the stands. I think the problem with society now is that a lot of it's gone online and social media, keyboard warriors behind kind of like anonymous Twitter feeds. And we saw with Jess Carter, the England's women's footballer, she's just come out and said she's coming off social media because she's had seriously bad racist abuse during the Euros, and makes one mistake, and basically she's singled out because of the colour of her skin. And I've seen quite a lot of that. And I think a lot of it kind of, he asked me as well, so I'm going to ask him my answer. I think a lot of it, Simon, I really hate the current narrative in this country about immigration. Everybody that comes into this country who is non-white is nasty and is going to be criminals and what have you. It's not true. Some will, some white people will. It's kind of just how the world is. But I just think there's certain people in positions with platforms who are right-leaning, who are basically making a lot of money out of stirring up trouble and hatred, and it's not healthy. And I've seen more anti-Muslim, more racism on social media in the last 6 months than I've seen probably ever. And people feel emboldened at the moment to be absolute idiots. And you can only stop if people call it out and tell them that they're wrong. But not enough people do that, I don't think. Anyway,
just before we move on, I just think it's really, just because I just spent a bit of time with him at the weekend. We've just had this period where Jofra Archer has, worked his socks off to try and get himself fit to come back and play Test cricket, and some of the narrative around him before he played, was I think pretty dubious. Some real question marks around him, which I just don't think there would be around a white player. And in the end, that first over, he comes back, takes a wicket, the unbridled joy from him, and then everybody else in the ground, his teammates, just, that's all he's trying to do. Bowl fast, take wickets. Like, it's really quite simple. And so I just think let's hold on to that. Let's hold on to that joyous, we're taking exuberance, and forget the rest.
The front on of that was beautiful in the follow through, as he was watching the ball go to slip, and then you could see him realizing it had been caught, and then the face just burst into a massive smile, and then Shoaib Bashir nearly got his ribs cracked because he basically hugged him so tight. It was absolutely, it was fantastic, wasn't it? Really good to see Jofra back and fit. Dean, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Have you got a copy of the book there?
I do, absolutely.
Hold it up
into every voice.
See it. Hold it up to the camera in Syd's voice there. Nice cover. And a picture of Syd Lawrence in full flow, also with boxing gloves, and also the picture of him down with his knee, having popped as well. So kind of like highs and lows of Syd's career there, all on the front cover. And where can that be bought, Dean? In all good bookshops, online, etc.?
Yeah, all good books. I mean, Fairfield Books, the publishers. So fairfieldbooks.co.uk, but also available at other online retailers.
Fairfield Books, they sent me my copy, so support them as well. Anyway, It's been an absolute pleasure, Dean, to catch up with you. Unfortunately, I mean, I did actually think this afternoon. I was looking forward to speaking to you, but it would have been so nice to have Dave Lawrence in that square on the screen, alive and kicking and talking about his book, wouldn't it? But unfortunately not to be. But in his absence, you've done a very fine job on his behalf, Dean. Been really good to catch up with you.
Thank you. No problem at all. Lovely to talk to you.
And thank you out there, everybody, for your questions and for watching and listening later. I've got so many podcasts planned in the pipeline. I could spiel off about 10 names, and they're good names. So stay tuned. There are more coming, and I'll see you again very soon on the Cricket Badger podcast. Cheers, everybody.